You're listening to Gamesforum's Mobilize and Monetize podcast. Dive into the world of mobile gaming with us as we explore the latest trends and discuss best practices. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mobilize and Monetize. Now, today I'm so excited because joining me on the pod today, I have Tina Shaw, who is Associate Creative Director at Activision Blizzard. Tina, so fantastic to have you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, no, thank you, Miriam. I really appreciate it.
And I believe congratulations are actually in order because I read that Call of Duty Warzone Mobile was selected as Apple Designers Awards as a finalist. So really well done on that. That's amazing.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, the team killed it on that. It's kind of funny because most people don't think about the design that goes into it, and
Mm,
they don't think about the long hours and the work that it really takes to make something work, to make something beautiful, to engage and to like kind of absorb you as a player into it. And that product team was just firing on all cylinders, and they have so much to be proud of.
amazing. Yeah, that was fantastic to read. So, Tina, I want to jump straight into our conversation today, and I want to start with something that's your realm of expertise and, looking at creative campaigns for mobile gaming. So, my first question to you is, how can creative campaigns be made cohesive and effective through multiple platforms? Obviously, with a specific focus on mobile gaming. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting because tradition really speaks well here in that, it's really all about collaboration, right? So rather than be planning the campaign and what type of creative is going to address the campaign in like these silos. If you have representatives from, the product, the marketing team, the go-to-market team, social marketing teams, and they can all join forces with the creative team,
Right.
then, what you kind of get is you get this cohesive and I would say kind of a dramatically effective campaign. And that'll be the result because you're hitting all the touch points with the consumer, but the creative is actually much more informed because
Right.
there's a lot of data that floats and kind of flies through all the different aspects of how you're going to market. But oftentimes the creative team isn't a part of that from the beginning.
Mm,
And one of the things that doesn't mean that there's not going to be obstacles to overcome, right? Because you're
right.
always going to have points of opinion. How do we, address these things in such a certain manner? But all the teams that are required to make a campaign, they'll be able to face those obstacles together. They're going to be able to overcome them just kind of through, I would just say very free form discussion and talking. And, it's kind of like a really nice way
Mm,
for each team to have a say, to get a seat at the table and to be able to really think about what is key to your game and how can you put it out there so that it feels cohesive, that it feels like all the little elements were thought of in one kind of flowing thread.
right. I love that. It's like the data feeding the creative aspect, which I think a lot of people, like from the outside, it's kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, but you guys are behind the scenes, so we don't see that whole process. So that's really interesting, that you bring that up. But on the topic of sort of creative campaigns, can you think of an example of some sort of creative campaign for a mobile game that stood out to you in terms of how creative it was? Maybe you saw and you were like, wow, that really had an impact on me just because of how creative it was. Or can you think of any other examples?
You know, I really like Pokemon Go.
I'm gonna second.
Mainly because, they've just been having fun with their
Right.
game. And I think sometimes we can fall into the aspect of taking ourselves too seriously, taking our game too seriously. And even though it's serious business, it doesn't mean that you can't go out and have a little bit of fun with it, right? And so
Right.
I think Pokemon Go and like one of the aspects of their campaign with Ed Sheeran, I thought that was kind of fun. I
Yeah.
think I think Roblox has been doing, some really interesting things. For me as a creative, I love the idea of some experimentation,
Right.
right? You definitely know the tried and true sometimes for a game that maybe has some history to it. But sometimes it's kind of nice just to shake things up and to see what works and what doesn't work. Um, there is the risk that, you don't want to alter how your players think about the game and how they see playing the game.
Right.
But
It's a fine
sometimes
line.
maybe just, yeah, sometimes just playing into it. I do think, and I'm going to be honest here, and this may not resonate with everybody, but I kind of don't really feel that we've fully tapped into, bigger creative campaigns on a mobile only scale.
Right. I probably second. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, no, I think that we're always looking for what is the ROI on
Mm,
mobile right now. But I think if we take note that, mobile is becoming the fastest revenue generator against console and PC. And so I
yeah.
really kind of feel it's just a matter of time, when, you've got your time, the infrastructure that allows you to do it, and then the
Right.
technology that can back it up. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the console game Halo 3.
Yeah.
But imagine their campaign for Believe that was like in the early 2000s. If you imagine it now, being able to create that on a mobile scale, on a digital platform scale,
Yeah.
it would have been more epic than it already was.
100%. And when you think about mobile itself, and like it's almost underrated because, and I had this conversation with someone called Indies from Livewire, and he told me the same thing that you said essentially. And because we all have our smartphones on us all the time, whereas like when you think
Mhm.
about a console, it's just like you just set it up. There's a whole process behind it, but the entry point to go into your phone and start playing a game or whatever it might be, it's always there. Therefore, the possibilities are just sort of like endless. So I definitely agree with you on that point.
I do kind of wonder if as technology is allowing us to do, but if it's really going to start taking off where even more games are going to be able to marry the console PC structure with the
Yeah,
mobile. So, you can just pick up all your data, all your metrics, your leaders board, all your CP and stuff. If that would translate over, if it's just going to become a natural thing so that you're always constantly able to play, but
yeah,
it does tap into the infrastructure and technology.
yeah, for sure. So Tina, I wanted to sort of ask you on the topic of creative campaigns, what is your sort of approach to creating creative and campaigns for mobile games, and what are the sort of essential elements that make these successful, in your opinion?
Um, you know,
Sort of a
it's
broad
funny.
question, but
Yeah, let me solve this puzzle.
yeah.
Um, well, it's interesting because I come to mobile games with a kind of a unique perspective in that
Hmm.
I've really only been 100% dedicated to mobile games for just a little over 2 years now.
Right,
And so my background has been heavily entertainment, television,
right.
and film. So my experience thus far, just kind of looking at it with, granted some of my newbie fresh perspective is that, it- for me, mobile game marketing is kind of more forward thinking, and you got
Mm,
to be forward thinking across these digital platforms. Um, and one of the things is like it's kind of very rare, right, that a publisher or that a mobile game um, studio that they're going to have the budgets to be able to
right.
create these big campaigns and these out of home campaigns. And even with the AAA publishers, it's kind of rare that they even do that for their
Mhm.
their mobile games. So for me, I kind of look at it with this perspective and maybe this lens of I want to try and create something that is memory worthy, something that can have like an emotional connection.
I love
So in order to do that, I kind of look at three things, right? So one is the audience. Every mobile game, even though there's going to be crossover audiences, every mobile game is going to have their own audience.
that. Yeah,
And so what is your positioning to that audience? Like when you're building creative for a campaign, you want to engage in social listening. I do that myself outside of, any data or anything that comes back because I'm kind of looking at it through my own biased, unbiased filter, right? What is that social listening showing me? What are the players talking about? What do they like? What do they not like? What do they want to see more of? What is it that maybe they don't understand? Or what is it that they haven't found yet
Right.
within your game, right? Then the second one would be storytelling. So my entertainment background experience really comes in handy because I
Yeah.
love telling a story. So, what's the narrative of your game? And then how can you kind of continue in an organic manner that story going across digital platforms, social channels
Yeah.
with the content that's gonna feel authentic and genuine
Yeah.
to the platform, to your player, and to your game. Because, when you think about some mobile games have kind of a rich history already behind them. And so they're just going to be expanding upon that, which is kind of a little bit of what I have going on right now with Activision. And
Yeah.
then some is just going to be completely starting fresh.
Yeah. That must be really
How-
exciting. That sort of like having a fresh slate, going into it with fresh eyes.
I think it's scary, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of
I mean,
like the
yeah.
world is your oyster. Well,
Yeah.
don't mess it up.
Yeah.
And then really, I think the third would be sort of, thinking outside of your game.
Yeah.
So, everybody who comes to a mobile game to determine if they want to play it or not, is they're going to have their own perspective of what it is, why
Right.
they like it, what makes them want to play. And so I kind of think as whether you're a studio, whether you're an independent, mobile game creator, whether you're a giant publisher, you want them talking about your game, which in essence is your brand.
Right.
And, you want them to connect you with that game because once they connect you with that game, they'll be more apt if they like that game to kind of always check in on you. What are you doing? What's your new
Right.
game? Because that's just as important because you don't want to be a one-off, right? You want to be able to, I would say you want to be able to build a relationship so that you guys have this synergistic approach to each other. You create games for the players know that you've got them in mind and you're creating these fun games, and then they come back to see what you've got on the docket.
Right. So you've given me a perfect leeway into our next section here, Tina, actually, because on the topic of user acquisition and actually retention, as you mentioned, what sort of key strategies use for user acquisition specifically in the mobile gaming sector across different regions such as America, Canada, Australia, and perhaps others?
Oh, that's a cakewalk. I
Passing the
Josh.
voice. Yeah, no pressure.
um, so I think one thing we always have to be, aware of is that every territory
Mm,
is going to bring unique challenges,
right.
right? Um, but with that also comes that opportunity to experiment. And I think user acquisition is a really good place where we do, and I am, I do a lot of user acquisition for where I am right now with Activision. We get to try some things,
Yeah.
we get to test some things. And so for me going into it with my team, I have it's sort of like I have like all these threes. I have these things I look at, which is, what's the market research for that
Yeah.
territory? Like we want to make sure that, what are they showing as far as interest? Is there anything that relates to awareness?
Yeah.
And then what is their current intent? Right? So then when you're looking at that, you kind of know the baseline of where you have to start because maybe
Right.
you don't have to start from scratch. Maybe there is an awareness, right?
Yeah.
But
I
now
think
you've got
it's
to
sort of like
build interest in
formulaic approach to
it.
everything, Tina. This is what I'm
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Because you always have to have a place to start.
Yeah.
So when I if I don't live in the UK, I don't live in Canada or Australia, I'm not really tapped fully into their culture and what's really working. So
Right.
market research is a huge thing for that. And the big thing is you can be an independent game developer for mobile without having to purchase all this expensive market research data,
Yeah.
but it requires you kind of doing a lot of it on your own or having someone on your team who can help you do it, right?
Yeah.
And so then once you've got some idea of what that territory looks like,
Mm,
well, Where does your game fit into it? So is it a niche game that has like, very specific parameters, or does it have like a much broader appeal?
Yeah,
And once you kind of start to hone in on that a little bit, that kind of gives you a good idea of maybe some of the content that you can create. And I'm a very big proponent of game testing,
right.
like, do you know people who can come in and play this game? Do you happen to know anyone? Or, there are some companies that will do this for you, is like getting some game testing going on within those territories.
Mm,
But that's
interesting.
gonna that's gonna be more expensive, and it's gonna be adding to your budget. And a lot of times,
Yeah,
especially where we are in society in the world right now, as
yeah,
far as what's been happening with gaming, that's just not in the budget, you
yeah,
know? It's just not in the budget. And so, within, if you're just gonna do local, I think that that's still super helpful. It
yeah,
gets you an idea of, we like to call it a soft launch, right? So you're just getting people playing it and getting their perspective. When you get their perspective, and then you've got your research to back up your territories, it's kind of interesting of like, all right, creatively, what do we know now? And then how do we kind of incorporate that into our content? And
right.
with user acquisition, you have a little bit of a A/B testing ground,
Mm,
right? Um, and the way that I kind of look at that is like, that's your experimental nature of where you can try some things to see what works and what doesn't work.
yeah,
One of the things that I think is kind of important is sort of trying to figure out, when you look at a piece of content, and this is the hardest thing for someone who, you know, when you're on a big publisher side, it's probably a little easier. And when you're on a smaller studio developer side, it's a little more difficult, is to take yourself out of it,
yeah.
because you're only looking at it from your very narrow perspective.
I could imagine that would be quite tricky to do.
Well, yeah, because you know why you created something, and you know why you love it, but it's
Yeah,
hard for a random player to be able to tap into all the feelings you have about it.
right. And
Right?
there's almost like these inherent biases, or not even biases or perspectives that you might have, and you don't even realize that you have them. And, having the ability to sort of shut them off, that is a skill in and of itself, I'd imagine.
And that's why I think it's kind of important to even just get your game to a point where you can just have people play. And I would say, it's kind of like focus groups. Have some of your friends play,
Mm,
because they're going to play it from the realm of being your friend, but they're probably also going to be willing to be a little bit more honest with you. But
right.
then also just get some people who aren't your friends, who maybe you just have, some sort of connection to, or you're an acquaintance, because
Mm,
that's where sometimes you may get some brutal honesty. And I think if you can look at that and really see that it's not against you or your game that is your baby, basically, right?
yeah,
Um, but that it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, I hadn't thought that that might not be coming across because of blah, blah, blah. So
right.
if I address that in a certain piece of content, almost like sometimes a how-to, or a something that relates to maybe something that you can do in that game,
Yeah,
I think those are key critical elements that ultimately don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money or a lot of time. It's
right.
just
Just
being
tried and
willing.
tested ways that, yeah.
Yep, totally. And at the end of the day, you come away knowing your game even a little better than you already thought you did.
Right. Really interesting. So you mentioned budgets there, Tina. So apart from that, what sort of unique challenges and opportunities do you face when developing sort of UA content for mobile games in the sort of diverse markets that you guys operate in, like Malaysia, Sweden, Peru?
Well, as we kind of touched on, it's about understanding the culture,
Right.
the player, what resonates with them within that country, right? Um, and the way that I could sort of say is, I come from right now, Call of Duty Mobile and Warzone Mobile.
Mm,
So in some of these countries and cultures, you're asking the question, do they like to see weapons? Do
yeah.
they not like to see weapons? So in one country, they are not, they're not for weapons. So you have to think creatively and differently about how do you represent a first-person shooter game in a way that doesn't involve weapons.
I never even thought about that. Like, I never even thought that that would be an issue that you guys face. But now that you say it, I'm like, well, yeah, obviously, because there's so many cultural nuances, across the
Yeah, and
globe.
in some other countries, they love it. They want to
Yeah.
know what all bundles they can get, what weapons they have, like
Yeah.
from any type of a weapon, like and it's like okay, so we'll make specific content for this territory,
Yeah.
but we need
Yeah.
to another, right?
These guys
But
want all
also
the guns. These guys want no.
right, exactly. But also outside that, people within different countries, they relate and respond differently to maps, modes, characters.
Yeah.
Um, then you got to think about, what are they active with? Are they active with bundles? Do they
Mm,
prefer to play solo? Do they like the multiplayer aspect? It's
right.
really very different, even from like sometimes here in the States, and I assume maybe where you are in the UK, some people just like and I'm one of these, I like to play solo.
Interesting. So I'm a Warzone player as well, and I'm too scared to play solo. But maybe that's because I'm not that great at the game. But
I
yeah,
just like to play solo. It's not because I'm good at it. It's just more because
the
I
experience.
don't I don't want to get destroyed by a whole bunch of other people. I'd rather just,
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
get it.
I think one of the big things to think about in different territories is like how best, can you
Yeah.
as the developer, as a publisher, as a studio, connect with your players no matter where they are. And realizing that one size does not fit all.
Mm,
Um, and it's kind of like this old cliche, but knowing who your audience is will be key. It will really be key to kind of speaking with them
yeah.
through a successful campaign that in the end is going to bring you a better result.
Yeah, for sure. So on that note, Tina, so what kind of KPIs do you believe to be most critical when measuring the success of UA campaigns for mobile games specifically?
Well, I'm probably the worst person to ask this question of because I am on the creative side and
Right.
less on the data UA side, but I will kind of say for me, we will go through creative reports and we'll kind of get an idea of, what the top content was and what the bottom content was. Um, and so although I may not be the best person to speak to this from a UA data perspective, what I can say is that, the IPMs, installs per thousand impressions, that is kind of interesting to track and just
Mm,
kind of get a feel for kind of what is working, as far as like what you hope that end result's going to be.
right.
Um, CTRs, a lot of people look at the click-through rate
Yeah.
and determine, you know, kind of like was that a key metric? And the only thing I would caution against that, and this is me having conversations with my mobile growth team, is that it shouldn't always be a primary for UA because there's just so many variables that are surrounding it.
Yeah.
But it's really good to look at if you're doing if you're looking at it in an organic social aspect, because then you don't have like spin behind it, you don't
Right.
have any type of deals of like when your ads being served and when it's not being served and where it's being served and stuff. So it's good to be able to see the click-through rate, but sometimes it's just a little skewed, and so it's
Right.
not always as accurate as you may want it to be for what you're looking at it for. And
Interesting.
then for us creatively, outside of all creative, it's depending on what the spin scale is
Mm,
for the mobile growth team. You want to see kind of what's the cost per install from that piece of creative, right? So what that's basically just saying what the ROI is. So
yeah.
if they spend a large amount of money, but the cost per install is small, they still spend a large amount of money to get that small cost per install, right? Because
Right.
it scales, right? But if they spend a low amount of money and they still got a large like install volume at a lower cost, that's a win.
Yeah.
That's a big win. And that's a piece of creative content that worked. And then you start to dive into, why did it work?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you kind of want to, I guess you kind of want to, in a way, have a model that you can recreate to a certain extent.
Yeah, yeah, but then remember, depending territories, it's always going to be different.
Yeah.
Players are super savvy and smart than all consumers. Like sometimes templatizing or giving a format to a piece of creative can be good, but other times it can go against you.
Right. Do you think people sort of catch on and think, well, they did that last time, or, this again kind of attitude?
I, Personally, I think so because I kind of call that out sometimes
Yeah.
myself. And so, as a creative, I try to look at it from, well, what would I think if I saw this? Would I be okay with it's a little similar to this other thing?
Yeah.
But, as far as creative and whoever's doing the creative, sometimes if it works, you don't want to break it. But you just want to kind of keep watching to see once it starts not working, it's time to change it up.
Right. Interesting. So, Tina, for our last portion of our podcast episode for today, I kind of want to ask
What?
you,
It's almost over?
yeah, it's almost over. I know. I could listen to you talk for hours, honestly. It's so fascinating to get your insights on
You
this.
really couldn't. You really couldn't. You'd be like, shut up, Tina.
Try me. So for our last section, I kind of want to touch on your specific projects and experiences that you've sort of gone through in mobile gaming. So out of curiosity, and I'm sure some people would want to know this, what are some successful campaigns led for major mobile game franchises that you've seen that have really, really stood out to you? I know you mentioned Pokemon Go, but that's more the game side. But on the campaign side, what's something that you've seen and you've thought, wow, that really, really stood out to me?
You know, it's very difficult. And I say this kind of sadly, and I kind of say this probably with a little bit of naivety. So I just don't know that I've really seen anything mobile centric that has just blown me away.
Yep, I think I agree
And
with that.
and I think I mean, and granted, I've really like I'm still like two plus years in, but I was a player before and
Mm,
just there's games that I like, and
yeah,
there's games that I would have loved to have seen what their campaign was. But honestly, I don't know that you really have a campaign for the vast majority of mobile games because there's just not this mentality that you need to create a campaign.
yeah,
Now, I think that you can have one-offs, right? So I think
yeah,
you can do some really cool one-off that may be able to, one, make people aware of your game and to kind of build interest that then
yeah,
they come and play it, right? But I'm kind of interested to see what's going to happen because when you think about like I've talked to this about to a couple of people, and for right or wrong, I'm going to tap into my background for a moment, but I
yeah.
think what's happening right now in gaming is very much parallel to what happened in entertainment. And what
Interesting.
I mean by that is here in the United States, we had like, the four big networks,
Yeah,
television networks. And then all of a sudden, just kind of randomly out of the blue, these streamers started coming in.
yeah,
And as these streamers started coming in, consumer behavior started changing, what they wanted to watch, where they were watching it started changing. Um, the brands behind it started changing. And so what I think you're seeing right now in gaming is the exact same thing is happening. You
interesting.
have your you have your big publishers,
Yeah,
but now all of those streamers now have game areas,
yeah,
right? They have game arms, they're building gaming studios. And so I think what we need to see and what we need to watch is that they're not just building or trying to build AAA games,
Hmm.
they're focused on the mobile gaming market.
Yeah.
And so being focused on the mobile gaming market means that it's going to become the Wild West again,
Yeah.
where you've got the big publishers and you need to make sure that your games that you're putting out are still in tune and in line with the players. They need to be playable. They need to be easily accessible. Because if not, what you've got happening on the streamer game side is going to challenge, it's going to steal market,
Hmm.
and it's something that one is really great for independent game creators and developers,
Yeah.
because what it has done now is it has opened up distribution channels and opened up distribution platforms. And that's super exciting. It
Yeah.
is super exciting if you're in the gaming world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's also a little eye-opening for publishers who've been in the market for a very long time, to know that you've got these other avenues of outlet nipping at your heels, who, think about it, they already have a built-in audience base.
Yeah.
And so I think the ability for mobile campaigns could potentially be coming to the forefront, and maybe we'll start seeing more,
Yeah.
um, where it'll be more than just a one-off. It will be actually, a much deeper, wider berth.
Are you
So
hinting at
it's
something here?
exciting.
Have you got something in the works? Are you giving us a sort of sneak peek?
As if I have that power. Ha. No, but I tell you, I do think it's fascinating. And I speak at some conferences and stuff, and just
Yeah.
talking to a lot of the game creators and then developers and user acquisition people. And I'm just sort of like, well, what do you think about what's happening right now? And where do you think mobile gaming is going? And how do you think that you can use it to your advantage, and to be able to get into it early,
Yeah.
and kind of like be established once it really starts to explode even more, because it's going to continue to grow.
Definitely. Really interesting stuff. So, Tina, I want to know from you, how does content and creative for mobile games differ? I know you sort of touched on this, but how, in your opinion, does it differ from those on console or PC versions? Sometimes even when, we're talking about the same franchises here.
Well, I mean, on the technical side, um, because my like, we're responsible for capturing and stuff. So on the technical side, I think mobile games have less fidelity.
Right.
Um, Although I have to tell you, and I'm going to give a plug for this, but Warzone Mobile is an amazing, amazing looking graphical game.
I mean, it's
Now,
really up there with the best, I'd say, because
and you do have to have a phone that can handle those graphics, and
yeah,
that's part of the infrastructure and technology that I was talking about earlier.
yeah,
But Warzone Mobile has really put out a beautiful game,
it's
and I think as
insanely good.
they're continuing to battle, technology that exists.
Yeah,
They're continuing to battle the infrastructure, but they are, and I think for the players who have been, kind of faced with their phones or devices not able to handle some of the peak graphics,
yeah,
I think it's just, the technology that you have will catch up. And what we have to do is we have to look at this as this was a truly innovative moment in technology on the mobile game side.
right,
And innovation does come with obstacles, and it comes with challenges, but you just keep working at it, and you keep putting it out there, and pretty soon, as that creative innovation is happening, technology and infrastructure has to catch up to it, because the expectation is now there, right?
yeah,
So, I think the fidelity is changing. I also think the in-game capture tools used to create the content,
right,
it differs greatly from PC and console to mobile. But again, they are catching up, right?
yeah,
And then, that's kind of things like broken camera, being able to attach a camera to an object to really show some creative depth and diversity, right?
yeah,
Um, to the smallest thing of just being able to use depth of field.
Yeah.
So it's not like the land of no shadows and the land of no
Yeah.
distance, right?
See, these are
And
things
then
that the audience doesn't really think about. It's like you being on the creative side of thing, like just you saying this to me, I'm like, oh yeah, like I would never. I mean, if I really was to like look at the gameplay and things like that, but other than that, like what goes on behind the scenes is just so fascinating, like all these nuances and things like that.
yeah, and all of that does inform the creative, right? It does
Right.
inform the creative. It does inform how we can create the content.
Right.
And you know, on the creative side, PC and console, they have traditionally, they do now, they get more resources to create and build their content.
Yeah.
But I do think, you know, that mobile is catching up, but I think with mobile, you have a bit more creative freedom. At least that's
Yeah.
my experience. And what I'm doing is I have a bit more creative freedom because oftentimes we're speaking directly to the player in real time in a much nimbler fashion.
Right.
And sometimes, you know, at certain times within mobile, you know, we're creating like specific moments of culture,
Yeah.
and we're trying to play into a trend that will just kind of like show, we see you, we hear
Yeah.
what you're saying, you know, and we have to be quick, and we have to pivot, and I think having that fun with it at times is really important. And so I think that that has a little bit more flexibility on mobile right now than maybe it does perhaps in PC console overall. But I do think they're starting to level out and to kind of be a little bit more parallel. It just, you know, it takes time to get there.
Really interesting stuff. Last question for you here, Tina, and a bit of a fun one because I know that you guys work with this sort of technology, but I wanted to know, as I'm sure a lot of people do, on the creative side of things, how does technology like motion capture and 3D scanning contribute to the sort of effectiveness of creative campaigns for mobile games?
Hmm. Okay, that's interesting. So I may be in the minority. I always like to preface that when I'm getting ready to have a challenging opinion.
Ooh,
But
controversy, love it.
but you know, I don't think motion capture and 3D scanning actually speak to the effectiveness
Mm,
of creative for a campaign. But what I do think they achieve is I think that they up our creative ability
yeah,
to recreate the game world in a more realistic and believable fashion for the player.
right.
And I think it also, which is super key, is I think it allows for greater fluidity of motion and movement
Yeah,
so that it's not, you know, as rigid as limited.
right.
Um,
It's more
you know,
smooth.
we're working, yeah, and we're working on something called Omni Movement, which is um for one of our new games coming up that we just announced. This is not mobile, but it's console.
Yeah,
Um, but I saw that and I was blown away because the motion capture and the scanning have allowed you to rather just be able to go like like 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. It's
yeah.
now like 360. You literally
Wow.
can just move and turn, and as you're running, you can dive and turn around. I mean, that's in a game.
Yeah,
And that's technology, that's infrastructure, that's innovation. And it's so exciting because with motion capture and 3D scanning, you get to be able to see the natural way that a body moves and the natural way that you know you can kind of get from A to B, and to make it more real to what you know and perceive and have lived.
mm,
That is exciting for a creative aspect because now you have it sort of like opened the door to other possibilities, right?
yeah,
And so will it become effective creative? Yes, but it has to be used in a way to be effective, I think. And you know, I think just sort of at the end of the day, we as players just want to be immersed into the game's world. We want to be entertained. And we either want to hone our skills within it, or with ego, we want to show others our skills that we have.
With ego, love that. Out of curiosity, just I'm obviously not like well versed in this, but this stuff seems really, really recent, like this technology, like motion capture, 3D scanning. Like, I would imagine, is it within the last few years that this has really become a thing? Because the smoothness of it, like you said, like the smoothness of the motions in the games, like this is only something that I've been seeing recently.
Um, I think, I think as it's been applied to gaming, it may be a little bit more new.
Mm,
They've always kind of used it in some form within like, visual effects for film and television and stuff.
right. But I guess it's
Um,
more advanced now.
it's much more advanced now. It's crazy because like they used some, and it was earlier stages of motion capture and 3D scanning, but for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And just to be able to do some of the things that they were showcasing and on a skateboard and stuff.
Oh, I can imagine.
And now it's kind of getting to where I'm waiting for where motion capture and 3D scanning has gotten so amazingly realistic at when we merge it with virtual reality, we literally will just be
Oh
like
my God.
next to regular people just doing whatever.
It's gonna be like that Bruce Willis movie where he goes into like I can't remember what it's called, but like he goes into like a capsule and then like he lives his life just so realistic. I don't even know, but it sounds it sounds very next level.
It keeps getting better and better, and
Yeah.
I think you know it's part of that three. They always say you can choose like the three things, like um what is it, fast, good, or cheap.
Mm,
And I think what we're seeing within some of the realms of gaming is taking the three things of time, infrastructure, and technology,
yeah.
and they all just have to kind of like come together and be working together. And sometimes it's really hard to get all the planets aligned to be able to do that, but I really do think television, film, and gaming, they're at the forefront of it, and they're the ones who are really pushing it. And it's a lot of reason because expectations and
Yeah.
wants. And I think what I hope that we as players always remember is
Mm,
that the those who create the games are players too, right?
right.
And they love what they're doing, they love the games, and what they're trying to do is put into the games they're creating their heart and soul, but also the things they want to see as a player.
Yeah.
And they're hoping that other players want that as well. And they listen to players and they put that stuff in there, and they're trying to find the balance. But I'm much more happy when players are creating the games that I get to play.
Right. Love that. Don't forget that the creators of the games are players too. I love that. That's a fantastic punctuation point for our episode here today, Tina. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. It was so fun to talk to you.
Oh, thank you, Miriam. It was so great talking to you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about creative and gaming because honestly, I love it so much, and I'm constantly challenged by it.
Right.
Um, but it's like sort of like a rebirth for me into a different industry and a different level of creativity, and I'm having a blast.
Fantastic. And Tina, we're going to be keeping a close eye on what you're doing over at Activision Blizzard because you guys are constantly pushing the limits. And, as I'm sure the audience listening to this is, we're constantly fascinated by what you guys are doing. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks, guys.